Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video on the Project Rebalance blogs, and here we have new Dupe Protection Nightmare drop rates adjusted. Let's open the blog. So, I did not cover part 2 of this adjustments that they made, as I felt that A, other people covered it fairly well, and B, I didn't really have too much to add. There were some likes and some dislikes, but my tweet here pretty much covers it. I thought the magic changes were good, and the minimum hit changes were great. Magic sort of becomes swapscape. I mean, hell, my 3-way swap becomes a 7-way swap with part 2 changes. Anyways, we replied about Inquisitors and the Nightmare. I asked them not to do it, and a whole bunch of other people shared their sentiments. You can see 330 replies here. But anyways, Project Rebalance item and combat adjustments. Our third Project Rebalance blog focuses on item adjustments and other combat changes. So here we are, Wednesday, April 24th. We're back with another blog update for this segment of Project Rebalance. If you want to see what's changing, then scroll down a little further, but while we're here, we want to take a brief moment to say a few words. To be blunt, we know Project Rebalance has been a lot. We've had 3 different sections across 3 massive blogs, numerous updates, multiple betas. There's a bunch going on. As the weeks have gone on, we've seen a number of comments to the tune of, "They're doing too much at once," or "I wish they'd slow down." And while we appreciate where those are coming from, we also want to explain just why there's so much happening. Put simply, old school is a slow burn, both in-game and in the gaming industry. We've been around for over 11 years at this point, which is even longer than the time from RuneScape 2's release in the 2007 backup that all of old school is built on top of. All that to say, we're not a competitive game. We're not looking to put out a balancing patch every week or 2 weeks and have all of you at home wondering whether you'll wake up every Wednesday and have to change your loadouts for the 10th time this year. It's rare for us to rebalance stuff for exactly this reason, and it means that every time we do elect to make changes, we try to capture more at once so there's one dose of readjusting and then things get left to settle. Of course, there might be the occasional kink to iron out, or feedback tweaks to make as the dust clears and more players interact with a rebalanced landscape, but we feel it's preferable to changing a couple things every week and winding up in a constant loop of minor tweaks. That's completely fair to me. Given how scarce these kinds of updates are, we want to reiterate that we only look to make them when we feel they stand to benefit the game in a broad sense. Both now and in the years to come, 2021's infamous Toxic Blowpipe nerf is an example of this. Yeah, in my opinion, that's a better late than never type of situation. Since we feel ranged is, by and large, in a healthy place at the moment, but the old Blowpipe with today's gear upgrades would have been an absolute monster. That is true and real. Part of what the rebalancing accomplished was ultimately paving the way for Missouri Armor, Dizaina's Quiver, and even the Venator Ring. Meaningful upgrades for people to chase that offer range strength, which would have been much harder to make healthy for range as a whole with the affordable and reasonably attainable Toxic Blowpipe dominating the meta. Similarly, it made room for the Crystal Armor and the Bofa slotting in alongside other ranged weaponry to give players more options, and allowed us to keep introducing meaningful upgrades without utterly trivializing older content. In this case, those benefits are things like improving the variety offered by various scaling methods, redistributing offensive stats to spread magic progression more widely, give players more options to tackle NPCs with elemental weaknesses, and open up new reward space for magic and range without just creeping upwards, among other things. Throughout all of these changes, something that we've aimed to keep consistent is that even if you just carry on doing exactly what you're doing right now, you shouldn't be significantly worse off for it in the overwhelming majority of scenarios. Still want to use your Abyssal Whip at Gargoyles? Your task might take an extra couple of minutes, but that's all good. You'd rather click Shooting Stars while you work from home than try Volcanic Mine? Sure thing. It's going to be just as good as it is right now, but that improved variety is waiting for you if you want to take a look. One thing I did want to mention is this point of still using your Abyssal Whip at Gargoyles. It's sort of the same idea for the magic tweaks that they're making and like the magic damage percent that they're redistributing across gear. Like, sure, you can take Max Mage with every single mage swap in existence, but if you take 1 or 2 less, it's only going to take you slightly longer at the end of the day. But also, we are RuneScape players and big number go burr, right? We're grateful for everyone who's taken the time to leave us feedback so far, whether in ramble videos, YouTube comments, Reddit posts and replies, Twitter comments. Everything helps us inform tweaks or adjustments. We're hoping this is our final update for this set of changes before getting to a stage where we can launch them and adjust as needed in case new feedback appears. Let's take a look at our last set of updates, the Voidwaker special attack. We're opting to shelve our proposed adjustments to the Voidwaker special attack. In hindsight, I think this is a great change for them, or I guess lack of change. I think this is great, as the point of the Voidwaker's special attack is to ignore that defense. Across your feedback, it didn't really feel as though any of you were on board with this adjustment without a clear sense of exactly what it would enable down the line when we reach the point of looking to release another spec DPS weapon, which could well be a long time away. We may revisit elements of this conversation and provide a clearer sense of exactly why we feel its current design is limiting for us, but we're not looking to make any changes to the Voidwaker for the time being. Personally, I would really love to hear their explanation as to why they feel it's limiting. I understand the point of the Voidwaker is to completely ignore defense, which makes it a special attack weapon at a base level, but could weapons not be designed to essentially deal more damage over this base level? I don't know, maybe I'm speaking out of turn here, maybe I don't understand something in particular, but looking at the Voidwaker, it's sort of that baseline, okay, I'll ignore your defense and I'll do X amount of damage. Maybe it becomes a slippery slope of having to design more weapons which ignore certain types of defense, like ignoring magic defense or slash defense. Maybe that's the restriction. Anyways, let's move on. Comment down below what you think. I think the Voidwaker change is really good. Or again, lack thereof. Magic damage redistribution. Last week's updates proposal was a step, pun intended, in the right direction for the most part, but one particular inclusion stood out above the rest: the Eternal Boots. Primary criticism levied against them was that bringing a boot switch isn't particularly commonplace in a lot of content, so requiring an extra switch to get back to the same damage numbers as before was off-putting for a number of endgame players. In particular, this feedback mostly related to the idea of bringing a 9-way switch, meaning 9 items worth of magic gear to switch to. In case you're unfamiliar, the reason this is a tough pill to swallow is that many players switch horizontally and zigzag their cursor between 2 rows to switch a maximum of 8 gear pieces. So adding a 9th piece moves this to 3 rows and harms the feel of switching like this. Vertical switchers stay winning. In the other camp are players who want to see Eternals given some degree of use. While all of the Cerberus associated boot upgrades are extremely minor compared to their base boot, Eternals are arguably the least substantial of all, since they only offer accuracy in a style which is almost exclusively used in scenarios where it's already incredibly accurate. So we've got a delicate line to walk between not having these best-in-slot boots feel like they're not even worth taking up a slot in your bank, and not wanting them to feel hard required or encourage an uncomfortable style of switching that runs against years of muscle memory. We'd like to propose the following: Eternal Boots magic damage to 1%, down from 2%, and Occult Necklace to 5%, up from 4%. If you watched the last video, this is where I initially thought the Occult was going to go, so I'm pretty happy that it's going to 5% instead. In terms of where exactly this leaves us, it varies based on a lot of factors. For endgame Shadow setups, you'll gain a small bit of damage in max mage setups with Eternals and the Magus, but will likely still lose out on a max hit if you're not willing to bring Eternals for the time being. For effectively everybody not using Shadow, you'll be better off than you currently are regardless of whether or not you're using Eternals. I think that's a fair compromise. This does mean that, in the future, upgrading a single % of magic damage will get you back to, or beyond, where you were at before if you're a Shadow user, but that in the short term for mage-heavy encounters like TOA, it might be worth considering camping Eternals over Prims. In my opinion, I think that's completely fine if you want to maintain that max hit, but at the end of the day, inside of TOA, the Shadow's multiplier is 4 times, I'm pretty sure, which makes it even more powerful than it is outside, so I think that is completely fair. We appreciate that it's a difficult balance here, but ultimately don't want to wind up in a scenario where we don't feel like we can ever put magic damage on boots because of concerns about the number of switches. Well, this is the case from the offset of our newest proposal. The addition of effectively any magic damage upgrade in any other slot will let you get back to camping Primordials without a care in the world. While it's not 100% ideal for some of you reading, we believe this is likely the best compromise we'll be able to reach with the conflicting wants of various players, while still delivering on our goal of redistributing magic damage to spread magic progression and gear upgrades to make them feel more meaningful for the majority of players progressing their accounts, whether those upgrades are obtained through economic progression or by unlocking them for themselves. I think these changes are completely fair. This gives Eternal Boots a slight use, which is better than before, and the Occult Necklace up to 5%. Well, it's what I expected to begin with, if I'm honest. Nightmare drop rates. First things first, we're walking back the proposal for dupe protection. While we said it wasn't something we'd look to roll out everywhere, many of you raised concerns that it doesn't feel all that old school, and were worried that it set a dangerous precedent. On top of this, it didn't exactly solve all the issues with Nightmare or Fasani's Nightmare when it comes to orbs, or just enjoyability for mains and irons alike looking for a reason to grind the boss. Once again, we've got a delicate line to walk here between wanting to make these bosses feel worth engaging and not wanting to undermine the monumental grind of those who've completed this content already. While I understand how people feel about this, hell, I completed full Inquisitor's armor prior to this drop rate buff, but I'm still for the drop rate buff. For example, the last video where they were talking about the Dragon Warhammer buff, hell, my Dragon Warhammer took 10k, and I know people who it's taken longer. But I'm not about to gatekeep any form of drop rate adjustment on this front. I don't know, that's just my opinion on it. After your last round of feedback, we took a step back and started thinking more on the lines of, if we were making the Nightmare from scratch today, what would we set rates at? That is a good way to look at it, in my opinion. And trying to marry it up with the previous point around undermining the achievements of those who've gone before. Okay, that's completely fair. Completely fair. We know this last point might not matter to some of you. Well, there it is. Might not matter to some of you reading. But we're not saying it from a position of gatekeeping. I swear to God, I did not pre-read this. Or the oft-cited, we had to suffer, and so should you. Old school is all about the grind, the journey, and the flex, which is something we try to keep in mind always. That is completely true, fair, and real. That said, even main accounts don't frequent these bosses. It's not uncommon to see a wholly unrestricted player say that they love the encounter design of Fasani's Nightmare, but they don't tend to engage with it because the time required to see anything worthwhile would be better spent elsewhere. Yep. We're proposing to further improve drop rates for these uniques and keen to see where things shake out for Fasani's Nightmare. Note that all of the same percent buffs apply to the regular Nightmare too, so the chance of any specific orb being buffed by 46.67% would go from 1 in 1800 to 1 in 960. We're choosing to focus on Fasani's here since we feel it's the more frequently engaged with of the two variants. This is true, but there is a reason why it is the more frequently engaged of the two. It's because normal Nightmare sucks. We realized this once Fasani's released, and it was very clearly the superior boss. Normal Nightmare needs some quality of life, truly, but maybe that's a separate video idea, or maybe that's a discussion in the comments idea. Anyways, the new rates will be as follows. Initially, I read off all of these, and I was going to leave it at that, but I decided, you guys have eyes, you can read. What's important here is essentially the percent buff compared to live. And if we use a comparative analysis, you will see that it is actually a 41.5% buff compared to the live game. I'm not sure where they got this around 30% buff from. I will note that their original proposal claimed that the Nightmare drop rates were getting buffed by 50%, and that's all I really have to say on that. If they feel these are the rates that Nightmare should be at, I say let's give them a shot. And I also am aware that this is more skewed towards the orbs. Not that I find anything wrong with that. I did want to look at the Part 2 Inquisitor's armor and mace change because unfortunately they didn't really address anything about this again in Part 3. But the Inquisitor's mace buff being dependent on a full set doesn't help its utility on Slayer tasks, including boss tasks like Cerberus or Grotesque Guardians. I have no clue who commented this, but I can guarantee you a majority of the player base does not use Inquisitors for Slayer. Now, mind you, I said majority because I'm sure there's still some masochists out there who like the glass cannon type of playstyle, because let's be honest, that's what the Inquisitor's armor is, but I am a little disappointed that they did not come back to essentially revisit tweaking the armor instead of tweaking the mace itself. I want to reiterate, the Inquisitor's armor change is strictly for the mace. It doesn't apply to any other weapon. It is a mace buff, not an armor buff. Slightly disappointed in that. But it is what it is at the end of the day. Assuming 6.5 kills per hour, this takes the average number of hours per unique down from 26 hours to 18 hours and sees a bigger proportional buff to the rate of obtaining the valuable orbs compared to other items, since their drop rate is almost doubled under this proposal. Yeah, almost doubled. Completely cool by me. We feel these numbers are in a better spot than our previous proposal to toe that line between having some items in line with their power, particularly the Harm Orb, who stands to get better over time as elemental weaknesses come into play, while maintaining some of the flex status associated with these items for irons, without overly undermining the time that some have spent grinding these out already. It's worth noting that we're not touching the pet or jar rates, so if you're competing against other collection loggers, then you'll still be rate limited by those 2 drops more so than any others. It's a really tricky balance, and we know that we're not likely to knock it out of the park for everybody at the same time. I mean, this is impossible. You can't make everybody happy. For the time being, if it incentivizes more of you to consider giving the Nightmare or Fasani's Nightmare a go, or perhaps put it higher up on your list for your next endgame grind, then we think it's a step in the right direction and can always reevaluate further down the line. That's all we've got for this update. We're in a position now where we feel we're achieving the majority of our core aims with Project Rebalance and feel comfortable with an upcoming launch to follow up with feedback tweaks like any other update. We know that there are more things you'd like to see added in or touched upon, but for now, we want to focus in on what we've got and making any necessary tweaks rather than stretching ourselves too thin and coming back with a new blog each week where we just add 1 or 2 extra things. We're immensely appreciative for all the time you've spent discussing everything we've shared, and we're excited, if not a little terrified, to see that discussion turned up to 11 once we get into the realm of post-release tweaks. Let us know what you think about today's blog in all of the usual places. This is awesome. This, in my opinion, is the correct way to go about buffing the Nightmare. I was not a fan of the dupe protection. I don't feel that is old school RuneScape, as they mentioned above up here, but that is essentially that. I think Project Rebalance is in a much better place personally. I think you should comment down below to let me know what you think about the changes we've seen today. And that's all I got for you today. Check out the most recent Inquisitor video if you haven't already, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one.